So, what happens when a Nobel Peace Prize winner, a man who's dedicated his entire life to fighting poverty, is suddenly asked to run a country on the verge of total collapse? Today, we're diving into an opinion piece from the Deseret News by Scott Leckman, which gives us a kind of one-year report card on this incredible political experiment in Bangladesh. To really get this story, we have to start with the man at the center of it, Muhammad Yunus. This one sentence, it pretty much tells you everything you need to know about his life's mission long before politics ever came calling. So, who is this guy? To really understand the test he's facing as a political leader, we first have to look at why he became such a global icon in the first place. I mean, just look at this. As Scott Leckman notes in his article, Yunus isn't just some notable figure. He is one of only 7 people in all of history to hold these top 3 honors. That puts him in the same league as people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. He's a world historical individual, and his whole life has been about fighting poverty through his revolutionary idea of microfinance, giving tiny loans to the poor with no collateral to help them start their own businesses. And this, right here, is what makes his approach so different. Leckman really highlights this core idea of social business. It's basically a whole new way of thinking about capitalism, using the power of business to solve human problems, not just to make profits for shareholders. This is the mindset he brings to the job, not as a politician, but as a problem solver. Okay, so how did this humanitarian suddenly become a head of state? Well, according to the author, it wasn't a choice. It was the result of an entire nation hitting its absolute breaking point. The author, Scott Leckman, he paints a really stark picture of Bangladesh after 15 years under what he calls the autocratic rule of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. He describes this climate of, government intimidation, no real rule of law, all of it standing against what the people were demanding. A democratic future they were literally willing to die for. And things happened fast. Leckman recounts how these student-led protests just exploded, and before you know it, the prime minister had fled the country. In that power vacuum, the student leaders turned to the one man they felt had the moral authority to lead. An 84-year-old Yunus, and from what Leckman tells us, he really resisted. He didn't want to be distracted from his life's work, but in the end, he agreed. And we really have to pause here for a second. This was not a peaceful transition. Leckman is clear to remind us of the profound, tragic, human cost of this revolution. He cites that 1,400 people, most of them young protesters, were killed by security forces. All right, so a year has passed. The big question is, how has this moral leader actually done as a political one? Let's turn now to Scott Leckman's assessment of this first year. Now, this is a really crucial point Leckman makes about what makes Yunus so different. He's not your typical politician. He didn't campaign for this job, and he isn't trying to keep it. In the author's view, that frees him up to just be a patriot, to do what he thinks is best for the country, without all the usual political games. And if you look at what Leckman reports, the results have been pretty remarkable. Right out of the gate, he says freedom of speech was immediately restored. And get this, Yunus openly welcomed criticism. His government also managed to stabilize a banking system that was teetering on the edge of collapse and build back up the nation's foreign reserves. And you can see the economic impact in a way that really matters to everyday people. Leckman points out that inflation, which was punishing ordinary folks at nearly 12%, has been brought down to below 9%. That's real, tangible relief for millions of families. And then there's this number, which is just staggering. The author highlights it to show the sheer scale of the corruption the new government is trying to tackle. They're trying to recover $234 billion in funds they allege were stolen and stashed abroad by the last administration. You see, what Leckman really emphasizes is that Yunus isn't just trying to patch up a broken system. No, he's trying to build a whole new foundation from the ground up. He's created these 11 reform commissions for the police, the courts, elections, you name it. And their job is to create a new, transparent rulebook that future political parties have to publicly sign on to before they can even run. But, and this is a huge but, the author makes it really clear this is no easy task. He shares this powerful quote from a top government official that kind of sums up the core problem. You have to reform the very institutions that are still staffed by people from the old regime. You can't just fire everyone and start fresh. And that's just one of the huge hurdles Leckman lays out. I mean, the interim government is basically fighting fires on all sides. There are massive disinformation campaigns online, pushback from the former ruling party, pressure from other countries like India, and even acts of violent revenge from some citizens. And to keep things in perspective, Leckman makes sure to include this important critique from Human Rights Watch. It just underscores how incredibly hard it is to overhaul an entire system and push through a human rights agenda, even when the person at the very top wants it. The road is just full of obstacles. All right, let's bring this all together in our final section and look at how this is all building toward a really uncertain, but also hopeful future for the 8th most populous country on Earth. This is a sentiment the author says he hears from a lot of Bangladeshis, and it just perfectly captures both the massive amount of hope they've placed on this one man's shoulders and the deep, deep anxiety they feel about what might come next. And this is the million-dollar question, right? Can these deep reforms actually stick? Leckman notes this fear that's hanging over everything. The fear that once Yunus steps aside after the elections in 2026, the old, corrupt ways will just creep back in, and this whole revolutionary moment will have been for nothing. Scott Leckman leaves us with this final, really powerful thought. He connects this incredible story from halfway across the world right back to all of us. He asks us to look at the sacrifices people made for a chance at democracy there, and then to think about what value we place on our own. And that concludes our explainer on this pivotal moment in Bangladesh. We really want to thank Scott Leckman for his detailed opinion and his on-the-ground perspective in the Deseret news, which made this whole story possible to share. Thanks for watching.